There comes a moment in every inner journey when seeking must end, not because you failed, but because you succeeded. At first, awakening feels like a storm, questions, pain, insight, confusion, wonder. You read, listen, search, and dismantle your old self piece by piece, but eventually something quiet happens. The hunger for answers fades. The chaos settles, and many people panic here. They think, I've lost my spirituality. In truth, something far greater has happened. Your awakening is no longer unfolding, it is complete. And completion is not the end, it is a call to responsibility. Today, we explore 5 unmistakable signs that your spiritual awakening is over, and why that means it's finally time to use what you've gained. In the beginning, you were starving, not for food, but for meaning. You woke up every day feeling like something was missing, like there had to be more than just surviving, more than just going through the motions. You searched everywhere, books stacked on your table, videos queued up late at night, voices in your headphones telling you how to live, how to think, how to fix yourself. Every new idea felt like air in your lungs because without it, you felt like you couldn't breathe. You were desperate to understand who you were and why you were here. And there's no shame in that. That hunger was necessary. That hunger is what pushed you to grow. But listen closely, because something changed. At some point, you stopped chasing every new voice. You stopped jumping every time someone promised a breakthrough. You still listen, but you're not desperate anymore. You still learn, but you don't cling. You don't need to repost every quote or repeat every concept to prove you're growing. You hear ideas now, and instead of asking, is this the truth? You ask, does this align with what I already know inside? That's not arrogance. That's maturity. You're no longer trying to fill a hole. You're standing on a foundation. See, when you were seeking, everything outside of you had power. A teacher could lift you up or break you down. A comment could shake your confidence. A new philosophy could completely change how you saw yourself overnight. That's because your inner structure wasn't finished yet. You were still building, still collecting pieces, still figuring out what belonged and what didn't. And again, that was part of the process. But now, you've reached a point where you don't need to grab everything that passes by. You can observe without absorbing. You can listen without losing yourself. You can disagree without feeling threatened. That's not because you stopped caring. It's because you finally trust yourself. Think about someone who used to call everybody for advice. Every decision, every problem, every little obstacle. They needed someone else to tell them what to do. They needed reassurance. They needed permission. But now, they pause. They breathe. They reflect. They respond instead of reacting. Even under pressure, they're steady. Even when things go wrong, they don't fall apart. They didn't become cold. They became grounded. That's what integration looks like. And don't get it twisted. This level didn't come easy. It came from mistakes, from embarrassment, from being wrong, from trusting the wrong people, from believing things that didn't serve you, from falling for hype and then feeling disappointed. Every single one of those moments helped you build discernment, helped you develop an internal compass. So now, when noise shows up, you don't panic, you filter. Psychology backs this up. When self-awareness matures, impulsive behavior drops. Emotional dependency weakens. Why? Because when your inner framework is stable, You don't need constant approval from the outside world. You don't need applause to move forward. You don't need agreement to feel secure. You know who you are even when nobody is clapping. That's power. And here's the part most people misunderstand. When you stop seeking so desperately, it doesn't mean you've stopped growing. It means your growth has shifted from accumulation to application. You're not collecting tools anymore. You're using them, you're testing them in real life, in conversations, in conflict, in pressure, in silence. Before you wanted answers. Now, you recognize patterns. You see how people react when they're insecure. You see how fear disguises itself as anger. You see how ego hides behind confidence. You see cycles repeat in relationships, in workplaces, in your own thoughts. And because you see the pattern, you don't get trapped in it as easily. You don't take everything personally. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to prove you're right. That's not weakness. That's mastery. There was a time when uncertainty terrified you. You needed clarity immediately. Now you can sit with the unknown. You can say, I don't know yet, and not feel small. You understand that some answers only reveal themselves through patience, not force. Through observation, not obsession. And let's be real, this stage can feel strange. Because the world is loud. Everyone is selling certainty. Everyone is shouting their truth. Everyone wants you to pick a side, adopt a label, follow a formula. When you no longer seek the way you used to, people might think you've lost your passion. They might think you've become distant. But what they don't see is that your fire moved inward. It became steady instead of explosive. You're not chasing highs anymore. You're building depth. You've learned that not every message is meant for you. Not every lesson needs to be learned again. Not every door needs to be opened. You conserve your energy now. You choose carefully where your attention goes. And attention, make no mistake, is one of the most powerful currencies you have. When you were seeking, attention was scattered. Now it's focused. You notice how much calmer you are, how you respond instead of react, how silence no longer makes you uncomfortable, how being alone doesn't feel empty, it feels clear. That's because you're no longer running from yourself. You've sat with your thoughts long enough to understand them. You've questioned your beliefs enough to refine them. You've faced enough inner chaos to find your center. And once you find that center, you don't abandon it every time a new idea comes along. This is the moment where many people think they're stuck. They say, I'm not learning like I used to. No, you're living what you learned, and that's harder because ideas are safe. Real life isn't. Applying wisdom requires courage. It requires restraint. It requires discipline. It requires you to trust yourself when there's no guarantee. But here's the truth. You're ready. You didn't lose the hunger. You transformed it. What once pushed you to search now pushes you to observe, to listen deeply, to see clearly, to move intentionally. You've stopped borrowing meaning and started generating it. You built the structure. And when the structure is strong, you don't need to keep checking if it will stand. You stand on it, you move from it, you build from it. That's not the end of the journey. That's the moment you finally walk with your own legs. Pain didn't leave your life. Let's get that clear right now. If you're waiting for the day when nothing hurts anymore, you'll be waiting forever. But something far more important happened. You stopped letting pain run your life. You stopped giving it the microphone. You stopped letting it define who you are. It still shows up, yeah. Sadness still taps you on the shoulder. Anger still rises in your chest. Fear still whispers in your ear. But none of them get to sit in the driver's seat anymore. There was a time when pain controlled everything. One bad moment could ruin your whole week. One rejection could make you question your worth. One mistake could send you into a spiral where you replayed the same scene over and over, asking yourself, why me? Why does this keep happening to me? What's wrong with me? And the more you ask those questions, the deeper you sank. Pain didn't just hurt, you let it become your identity. But something shifted. Now, when pain shows up, why me anymore? It asks, what does this require of me? That question changes everything. Because why me keeps you stuck. It keeps you powerless. It keeps you looking backward. But what does this require of me? Pushes you forward. It turns pain into a challenge, not a sentence. It turns suffering into instruction, not punishment. That shift is not small. That shift is life-altering. Think about rejection. There was a time when rejection crushed you. A relationship ending made you feel unlovable. Not getting the job made you feel incapable. Being overlooked made you feel invisible. You didn't just feel the pain, you became it. You isolated, you shut down, you questioned your value. You tried to numb it or run from it or pretend it didn't matter, but deep down it ate at you. Now, rejection still hurts. Let's not lie about that. You still feel the sting in your chest. You still feel that moment of disappointment. But you don't collapse anymore. You don't self-destruct. You don't start tearing yourself apart internally. You pause. You breathe. You ask, what can I learn from this? And then you adjust. You refine. You move forward with more clarity than you had before. That's growth. You didn't become heartless. You became resilient. Neuroscience backs this up. When the brain is stuck in rumination, replaying pain without meaning, it stays in a stress response. Anxiety increases. Emotional control weakens. But when pain is framed as purposeful, when meaning replaces rumination, the brain literally responds differently. Emotional regulation improves. You gain access to parts of yourself that were unavailable when you were overwhelmed. In simple terms, when pain has meaning, it loses its power. Before, pain knocked you down and kept you there. Now, pain shows up and you stand taller. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you trust yourself to survive it. You've been through enough to know that discomfort doesn't equal destruction. You've cried and lived. You've failed and recovered. You've lost and rebuilt. And that experience changed your relationship with pain. You don't panic when it comes anymore. There was a time when fear controlled your decisions. You avoided risks because you didn't want to get hurt again. You stayed quiet because you didn't want to be judged. You settled because rejection felt unbearable. Pain trained you to play small. But now you understand something powerful. Avoiding pain also means avoiding growth. And growth has become more important to you than comfort. So when fear shows up now, you acknowledge it, but you don't obey it. Anger used to scare you too. You either exploded or suppressed it. You thought feeling anger made you a bad person. Now you recognize it as a signal, a boundary crossed, a value violated, a truth ignored. You don't let it control you, but you don't deny it either. You listen to it. You translate it. You decide what to do with it. Sadness used to drown you. Now it slows you down just enough to reflect, to rest, to reconnect, to reset. This is what emotional maturity looks like. You stopped trying to escape pain and started learning from it. You stopped asking it to leave and started asking it to teach. And when pain becomes a teacher, it no longer needs to be a tormentor. That doesn't mean every moment is easy. Some days are still feel heavy. Some nights are still quiet in a way that hurts. But even then, there's a difference. You don't feel lost inside the pain anymore. You don't feel like it's endless. You know it's temporary. You know it's shaping you, not breaking you. You've learned that strength isn't pretending nothing hurts. Strength is feeling it fully without letting it turn you into someone you're not. That's why you don't avoid pain anymore. You don't numb yourself. You don't distract yourself endlessly. You sit with it when you need to. You face it. You ask what it's trying to show you. And then you move forward carrying wisdom instead of wounds. That's not something you learn overnight. That comes from experience, from falling apart and putting yourself back together, from realizing that you are stronger than your worst moments, from discovering that pain can visit, but it doesn't get to move in. You're not controlled by emotions anymore. You're informed by them. And that changes how you walk through the world. You take risks now because you trust your ability to recover. You speak up because you're no longer afraid of discomfort. You love more honestly because you know heartbreak won't destroy you. You fail forward instead of failing inward. Pain no longer defines you, it refines you. And the moment pain lost its authority over you was the moment you truly stepped into your power. There was a time when you were trying so hard to be good. You wanted to be light. You wanted to be positive. You wanted to be pure. You told yourself that if you just stayed calm enough, humble enough, quiet enough, all the ugly parts inside you would disappear. You thought growth meant deleting anger. You thought spirituality meant killing ambition. You thought being evolved meant never feeling jealousy, never feeling desire, never feeling rage. So every time those emotions showed up, you panicked. You judged yourself. You pushed them down and told yourself, I shouldn't feel this way. But here's the truth. You didn't become better back then. You became divided. Because the more you tried to reject those parts of yourself, the stronger they got. Anger didn't go away. It just went underground. Ambition didn't disappear. It just turned into guilt. Desire didn't vanish. It just came back as shame. And that internal war drained you. You were exhausted not because life was hard, but because you were fighting yourself every single day. Then something shifted. You stopped being afraid of your shadow, not because you became reckless, not because you stopped caring about ethics or values, but because you finally understood something powerful. Those darker impulses were not enemies, they were energy. Raw, undirected, misunderstood energy. And energy doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be disciplined. That realization changes everything. Now, when anger rises, you don't explode and you don't suppress it. You observe it. You ask where it's coming from. You recognize it as a signal that a boundary has been crossed or a value has been violated. You don't let it control you, but you don't deny it either. You own it. And because you own it, it no longer owns you. You can acknowledge selfish thoughts without becoming a selfish person. You can feel rage without acting blindly. You can admit ambition without shame. You can say, yes, I want more, without apologizing for it. That's not corruption. That's clarity. A finished awakening doesn't erase darkness. It integrates it. Look at history. Look at leadership. The most dangerous people are not the ones who admit they have darkness inside them. The most dangerous ones are the people who believe they don't. The ones who think they are morally flawless. The ones who say, I could never do something like that. Those are the ones who justify cruelty, who abuse power, who harm others while telling themselves they are doing good. On the other hand, leaders who understand their shadow, who know what they're capable of, build systems to restrain themselves. They create discipline. They set boundaries. They stay accountable. They don't trust themselves blindly. And that's exactly why they can be trusted. Self-awareness is what keeps power from becoming poison. And this applies far beyond leadership titles. It applies to parenting, to relationships, to business, to influence of any kind. When you pretend you don't have darker impulses, they leak out unconsciously. When you acknowledge them, you can channel them intentionally. That's why you're no longer afraid of who you could be. You've stared that possibility in the face. You've seen what unchecked anger could do. You've seen how ambition without ethics could destroy. You've seen how desire without restraint could cost you everything. And instead of pretending those possibilities don't exist, you chose responsibility. That's maturity. Earlier, you thought being good meant being harmless. Now you understand that being good means being dangerous but disciplined, controlled, conscious, because harmlessness isn't virtue. It's weakness disguised as morality. Strength with restraint, that's virtue. You don't need to prove you're pure anymore. You don't need to convince anyone that you're enlightened. You're honest with yourself, and that honesty makes you steady, grounded, real. You notice it in your reactions. You don't overcorrect anymore. You don't swing between extremes. You don't shame yourself for having human impulses. You take ownership of them. And ownership brings choice. Choice is power. You can choose when to assert yourself and when to stay silent. You can choose when to push forward and when to pull back. You can choose when to compete and when to collaborate. Those choices only exist because you stopped running from your shadow. And let's be real, this wasn't easy. Facing the parts of yourself you didn't like took courage. Admitting that you were capable of harm took humility. Recognizing your hunger for status, recognition, control, or success took honesty. Most people avoid that work because it's uncomfortable. It's easier to wear a mask. It's easier to play a role. It's easier to pretend, but pretending keeps you fragile. Now you're solid. Because you're whole, you no longer live in fear of losing control because you understand what control actually is. It's not suppression. It's integration. It's knowing your impulses so well that they don't surprise you. It's building systems in your life, habits, values, routines that keep your power aligned with your principles. That's why people trust you now, even if they can't explain why. They feel your stability. They sense that you're not hiding from yourself. And someone who isn't hiding from themselves doesn't need to manipulate others. You don't moralize everything anymore. You don't divide the world into good people and bad people. You understand complexity. You understand contradiction. You understand that growth doesn't mean perfection, it means responsibility. And responsibility is heavy. It means you can't blame your shadow when things go wrong. You can't say, that's just who I am. You know better now. You know you have a choice. And that choice is what makes you powerful. You're trusted with who you are because you're no longer afraid of who you could be. You've looked into that darkness and decided not to let it rule you. You didn't destroy it. You didn't deny it. You integrated it. And in doing so, you became someone who can hold strength without abusing it, ambition without corruption, and intensity without chaos. That's not weakness, that's mastery. There was a time when everything got under your skin. A comment could ruin your day. A look could make you question yourself. A disagreement could feel like a personal attack. You didn't just hear criticism, you absorbed it. You didn't just enjoy praise, you depended on it. Your sense of self lived outside of you, floating in other people's opinions, rising when they approved and crashing when they didn't. And whether you realized it or not, that made you fragile. But something changed. Now, criticism doesn't cut you the same way. It might still register, but it doesn't wound you deeply. And praise, it feels good, sure, but it doesn't intoxicate you. It doesn't make you forget who you are or start performing for approval. That's not because you stopped caring. It's because your sense of self finally moved inside. Earlier, disagreement felt like rejection. If someone challenged your ideas, you felt challenged as a person. If they didn't agree with you, it felt like they didn't accept you. So you either fought hard to defend yourself or shut down completely to protect your feelings. Either way, you lost your peace. Now, disagreement is just difference. You can share an opinion and hear someone push back hard, and instead of your chest tightening and your ego flaring, you stay grounded, you listen, you consider, you respond calmly if it's worth responding. And if it's not, you walk away without resentment, without replaying the conversation all night, without needing the last word. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's self-possession. Because when your identity is fragile, everything feels like a threat. Every conversation feels like a test. Every interaction feels like you're being judged. You spend so much energy managing impressions, defending your image, proving your worth. It's exhausting. You're not even living, you're performing. But when your identity stabilizes, you don't need to defend it anymore. You know who you are. You know what you stand for. You know what matters to you and what doesn't. And because of that, other people's reactions stop controlling your emotional state. You don't need everyone to understand you. You don't need everyone to agree with you. You don't need everyone to like you. You're not trying to be impressive anymore. You're trying to be honest. Research backs this up. People with clear, stable self-concepts experience lower anxiety and higher life satisfaction. Why? Because when you're not constantly questioning your worth, your nervous system can relax. You're not on edge. You're not hyper-vigilant. You're not scanning the room for validation or rejection. You're present. And presence is powerful. You notice it in the way you speak now. You don't rush your words to be liked. You don't over-explain to avoid being misunderstood. You say what you mean and let it land where it lands. If someone misinterprets you, you correct them calmly or you don't. Either way, you don't spiral. Before, silence after you spoke felt unbearable. Now, it's just space. You've also learned something important about criticism. Some of it is noise. Some of it is projection. Some of it says more about the other person than it does about you. And some of it, if you're honest, is useful. When your identity was fragile, you couldn't separate those things. All criticism felt like an attack. Now, you can filter. You can take what helps and discard what doesn't without emotional collapse. That's growth. Praise works the same way. You appreciate it, but you don't chase it. You don't shape your entire personality around what gets applause. You don't abandon your values for approval. You don't rise too high or fall too low based on how others respond. You stay centered. Earlier, being liked felt like safety. Now, being aligned feels like peace. And let's be clear, this didn't happen because life got easier. It happened because you got stronger. You've been misunderstood enough times to survive it. You've been criticized enough times to realize it won't kill you. You've been praised enough times to see that it doesn't complete you. Experience taught you what words never could. You stopped outsourcing your worth. You also stopped arguing to win and started speaking to express. You don't need to dominate conversations. You don't need to convert everyone to your point of view. You don't need to prove your intelligence or justify your existence. You trust that the right people will understand and the wrong people don't need to. That kind of confidence is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It just stands firm, and because you're not defending an image anymore, you're free to change. That's another thing people don't talk about. When your identity is fragile, growth feels dangerous. Admitting you were wrong feels like failure. Changing your mind feels like weakness. But when your identity is solid, growth feels natural. You can evolve without feeling like you're betraying yourself. You can say, I've learned more. You can say, I see this differently now. You can say, I was wrong. And none of that threatens who you are. That's emotional stability, not detachment, not numbness. Stability, you feel deeply, but you're not easily shaken. You care, but you're not controlled. You engage, but you don't lose yourself. You've learned how to stand in your truth without needing to shout it or defend it at every turn. People notice that. They feel it when they talk to you. There's less tension, less reactivity, less neediness. You're not asking them to validate you with every sentence. You're not scanning their face for approval. You're simply there, and that presence gives your words weight. You're no longer living for applause, and because of that, you're finally living honestly. You say yes when you mean yes. You say no when you mean no. You don't betray yourself to keep the peace. And you don't create conflict just to feel powerful. You're balanced. You're inhabiting your truth. And truth doesn't need armor. It doesn't need constant defense. It just needs to be lived. When you live it consistently, criticism loses its sting and praise loses its grip. You become steady, grounded, unshakable in the ways that matter. Your identity isn't fragile anymore. It's rooted. Something changes when the journey inward is finished. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed at first. A subtle pressure in your chest, not anxiety, not fear, duty, responsibility. A deep knowing that what you've learned cannot just sit inside you without consequences. Because insight that isn't used doesn't stay neutral, it decays. It turns heavy. It turns restless. It demands movement. This is the moment most people don't talk about. When awakening ends, responsibility begins. You don't feel superior to anyone. In fact, if anything, you feel more humble than before. You see how much you don't know. You see how complex life really is. But at the same time, you feel accountable, not in a loud, self-important way, in a quiet, steady way. Like you've been trusted with something, and now it's on you to carry it well. Earlier in your journey, everything was about healing yourself, fixing yourself, understanding yourself, and that was necessary. You had wounds to tend to, confusion to clear, patterns to break. But now something has shifted. You're no longer consumed with your own pain. You're aware of it, but it doesn't dominate you. And because of that, your attention starts moving outward. You start asking different questions. How can I use this? Who needs this? What am I supposed to build with what I've learned? That's responsibility talking. Look at people who've survived real hardship, serious illness, deep loss, financial collapse, personal crisis. They don't all respond the same way, but many of them share something powerful. After they heal, after they stabilize, they feel compelled to serve, to teach, to mentor, to protect, to create something meaningful. Nobody has to tell them to do it. Nobody has to pressure them. They feel it in their bones. Because pain clarified their values. Psychology confirms this, meaning driven individuals consistently report higher resilience and fulfillment than pleasure-driven ones. Pleasure fades, comfort numbs, but meaning strengthens. Meaning gives suffering a direction. And once you've tasted that kind of meaning, going back to a self-centered life feels impossible. That's where you are now. You don't want to just feel good. You want to be useful. And usefulness brings weight. Responsibility isn't glamorous. It doesn't come with instant rewards. Sometimes it's inconvenient. Sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes it asks you to show up when you'd rather rest, speak when you'd rather stay quiet, act when it would be easier to scroll, distract, or delay. But you don't resent it, because you understand something now. You understand that clarity comes with obligation. You see the patterns others don't see. You regulate emotions others can't regulate yet. You hold yourself steady in moments where others fall apart. And because of that, you can't pretend you don't know better. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you know. That's the burden and the privilege. You notice it in small moments. When conflict arises and you're the one who de-escalates. When someone is lost and they come to you, not because you have all the answers, but because you don't panic. When something needs to be said and you feel that internal nudge telling you, this is on you. You didn't ask for that role, but you grew into it. And here's the important part. You're not doing this to be admired. You're not trying to be a savior. You're not trying to fix everyone. That's ego. What you feel is different, quieter, more grounded. You don't feel above people. You feel connected to them, accountable to them. You understand now that healing wasn't the destination. Healing was preparation. Awareness wasn't the goal. Awareness was training. The real work is application, living what you know when it's uncomfortable. Upholding values when it costs you something. Acting with integrity when nobody's watching. That's responsibility. You also realize that nobody is coming to do this for you. No perfect leader. No flawless system. No external force that will magically fix what's broken. Change happens when people who are awake enough decide to act. And you're awake enough now. That doesn't mean you carry the whole world on your shoulders. It means you carry your part, your influence, your space, your voice. your actions. You're more intentional with your time now, more selective with your energy. You don't waste it on endless distractions or meaningless drama. Not because you're better than that, but because you understand cost. You know every hour spent avoiding responsibility is an hour you don't get back. You've seen what happens when potential goes unused, when wisdom stays theoretical, when people know better but don't do better, and you don't want to live that way. So you show up, even when you're tired, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't benefit you immediately, because fulfillment has replaced gratification. This responsibility also changed how you see yourself. You're no longer obsessed with self-improvement for the sake of ego. You improve so you can carry more, handle more, contribute more. You build discipline not to look impressive, but to be reliable. To be someone others can count on when things get heavy. That's a different level of maturity. And yes, sometimes you miss the simplicity of earlier days, when growth was just about you, when the focus was internal. But deep down, you know you wouldn't trade this stage for anything, because this stage has meaning, direction, purpose. You're no longer here just to heal yourself. You're here to apply what you know, to model what emotional regulation looks like, to demonstrate what integrity looks like under pressure, to build something that outlasts your comfort, to protect what matters, to guide when you can, to stay steady when others can't. This responsibility doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it doesn't overwhelm you all at once. It simply stays, a quiet reminder that your life isn't just yours anymore, that your growth has ripple effects, that your choices matter beyond you. And once you feel that, you can't go back, because awakening was never meant to be an escape. It was meant to be preparation. The work isn't finished when you understand yourself. The work begins when you decide what you're going to do with that understanding, and you already know the answer. Awakening was never meant to make you special. It was meant to make you useful. Your clarity is not for isolation. Your insight is not for escape. Your awareness is not for endless reflection. It is for action. To speak when others remain silent, to remain calm where others panic, to build, protect, guide, and endure. The journey inward is complete. Now comes the far more difficult task, living it outwardly. You are no longer becoming. You are responsible, and that is the true beginning.